environment in which we're working in with so many initiatives across so many areas. Now, today we have the pleasure to be talking with someone from DG Move. So first of all, myself, my name's Gareth McNaughton. I am the Director for Innovation from the EIT Urban Mobility based in Barcelona. So not that far away. We are an organisation based out of Budapest. We are co-funded by the EU, and we are in what we call the third pillar of the framework programme. The first pillar is research. It's for individual group research, fundamental work. The second pillar you'll probably know quite well. That would be the societal pillar, which you would normally be applying for funds for projects. And the final pillar, the third pillar, is the economic pillar. And that's where we're supposed to make money, create jobs, and build a bridge between innovating research and actual products, services, and solutions. So today, it's a pleasure to be here. We're going to introduce you to Dr. Saki Gerasis, and I believe, are you online now with us?
Yes, hello, good afternoon, Gerard. Buenas tardes a todos. Can you hear me?
We can, wonderfully clear. And I recognize those offices in the Commission with the lovely blackboards that you have behind you. Okay, so our guest speaker, Dr. Gerasis, is from Spain, as you'll see, but he studied at the University of Vigo. And if I'm right, your doctorate was in data analysis, decision-making in the mining and energy, which I'm sure has been essential for your work. He's previously had experience before moving to Belgium of being in Norway and doing some research there, I think. That was also with the National Technical University of Norway. And we get the pleasure to have a chat today. So, we would open up for some questions. Of course, we're going to have some structured chit-chat, and then we'll be opening to questions, both from people online and from the audience. So if you have questions that come up as we're discussing, please feel free to send them in, and we will do our best to be able to answer them. Okay? The structure we had thought today, we would be looking at three main areas. One is to do with generation. The next area we'd be going to is the consumer experience, and then we'd be looking at data, technology, and its impact. That's the three main areas we thought about talking today. So, in the first area, we have today benefited from an overview from multiple projects, and the comment in the coffee that we've been getting is a message we hear a lot. The complexity of what's going on. There's multiple programs, multiple projects, and it's sometimes difficult for people who are embedded in the EU programs and national programs to understand how they interrelate, but it's also very difficult for the general public. So as we move towards things like the Green Deal that's come out, we had the Connected Europe Facility, the European Climate Law, Renewable Energy Directive. These things are essential in the pathway forward. But it would be great if we could have a chance to chat a little bit about the generation that we're looking at. As we're moving to electricity, the volume of electricity needed increases. And there's concerns over how clean the transition would be, how rapid the transition will be, and how we can ensure that the generation and infrastructure is there for the new energy transition. Now, from your side and from what you're working on, how can we assure that the new electricity and alternative fuels that are being offered are going to be clean and will be traceably clean to the end?
Thank you, Gareth. This is a very good question to start off, and not an easy one, I must recognize. Particularly, as everyone knows, given the current energy crisis that we are having right now in Europe, and particularly in Spain, where it's, I believe, every day in the news, because of course it's beating records. So in this context, of course, one of the main questions, the main challenges that people face, and of course the private sector, is how we can implement a technology that could involve higher costs. So for that, of course, we consider that if we want to move to zero emissions, if we want to achieve climate neutrality in 2050, or almost 90%, in this context, of course, the generation has to be clean. So from that point of view, of course, we believe that we have undertaken main steps already. We are in a good path to achieve that. You can see, I mean, not to mention now a specific figure to get bored the audience here today, but you can see that the share of renewable energy is steadily increasing in Europe. We have, of course, several relevant legislation, including the new Renewable Energy Directive that the Commission released on 14 July as part of the Fit for 55 package that is expected to accelerate this increase, and of course, looking particularly at transport.
Okay.
So, to this respect, we believe that we are on the good path, regardless of entering in specific casuistics and topics of different countries, different member states. As I said, we are on the good path. However, just to point out, when we talk about generation, there are different solutions. And what is important for us is that we push the most reasonable technology in the best place. It's not the same the south of Europe than the north of Europe. We have different characteristics. Every region is different, so we need a flexible and agile approach for generation that allow us to bring in an easy way when we talk particularly about transport this clean electricity to recharging points, to refueling points, also looking at the transmission of this generation. So I said, this is a complex topic. We believe we are in the good path to it. Of course, we are facing curves as part of this path, but with the new legislative proposals, including the Renewable Energy Directive, the focus on transport, I'm pretty sure we will overcome this particular course that we are facing these weeks in Europe.
I think what you said is very important in the sense of the articulation of the problem, the recognition of the problem is there to ensure that as we move to more electric consumption and energy, that the full supply chain is clean. So just to recap that on the Renewable Energy Directive, it's aiming that 40% of our energy is going to be from renewable sources by 2030. So about 9 years to go. Okay, so that's quite a target for us to do. We're looking from what I would see would be alternative fuels. Now, we have Repsol, who's part of our conference program, and they're sponsors here. And they've been explaining some of the technologies they're developing on hydrogen. And we wanted to discuss a little bit the mix that we are seeing, the energy and the push towards electric mobility and battery electric mobility. But when it comes to fuel cells and hydrogen, how important do you see hydrogen innovation playing a role in the future of Europe's energy mix?
So indeed, I mean, we have to differentiate two things here. When we look at generation and particularly industrial applications, and I'm not talking about transport right now, but as part of the Commission viewpoint and the EU viewpoint, hydrogen is going to play a key role. It's going to play a big role in industrial applications, manifold plants for diverse processes. However, when we talk about transport, the picture could be a bit different. And here, let me stress that the Commission follows a technological neutral approach. So it's not for the Commission to position one technology on one fuel or another. However, yes, I can highlight that, for example, what we are seeing right now in the market in terms of transport for light duty vehicles, battery electric vehicles are having the highest shares. Of course, we are seeing here a predominant tendency for this type of solution, for this type of technology. However, when we look to heavy duty transport, to long distance haul, here we see that the hydrogen could play a relevant role in the future. Having said that, towards our first milestone, big milestone in 2030, these technologies, they still need to mature. So having said that, we cannot say, we cannot predict with accuracy right now what is going to be the mix or what is going to be the predominant technology in this regard. However, as said before with the generation, also here we need to have a flexible approach and make use of the best technology in the best case.
Okay. We benefited today from a presentation on ALSA, the well-known bus company here, and they were highlighting just the point that you made there on the maturity of the solution for hydrogen for them. And they had explained the cost of acquisition remains quite prohibitive for them. And then secondly, on top of that, was the network for the ability to recharge and supply their vehicles. And that network to support their vehicles that do have that long distance that you highlighted. It was a very good overview today of the challenges they face as they're innovating. Talking of companies, so we've mentioned Repsol, and we've just mentioned our friends in ALSA. So we are seeing many what is classically heavy carbon polluting companies investing substantially in marketing, but also in innovation in the area of green renewable energy. Some people are quite critical of that, saying that they continue to be the main polluters, but they also are investing often billions per year. Do you see the engagement with these large companies as something truly positive? Are they actually making the differences that we hear about? Is that something to be celebrated and to be seen positively by the Commission and the governments that we work with?
Yes, of course. We strongly believe that this is a positive trend. Of course, we are not going to enter into specific opinions of what is the strategic approach of each company or like gas industry in particular. However, we believe that everyone has to be on board. Indeed, this is an irreversible shift towards zero emission. So everyone, for their survival, will have to be on board. So to this respect, particularly to these predominant sectors in the past, particularly we talk about the oil and gas industry, we believe and we are seeing right now that they are getting involved. Particularly, I can mention our alternative fuels infrastructure regulation proposal. We see this part of the industry involved discussing with us. Also, we have seen investments in infrastructure. So we believe they are getting involved. Of course, the time will determine how much each particularly industry sector and each phase will develop their own solutions and will execute this transition. However, we open our arms to everyone, and I mean, if we look in particularly, for example, to some of the legislation, in particular the CO2 standards, we can see that, I mean, the transition is clear, has a deadline, so everyone has to get involved. And as we have seen with the CO2 standards for vehicle manufacturers, how they have carried out this transition from diesel and gasoline towards zero emission vehicles, we perceive in terms of the energy sector how the predominant industry in the past is going to execute and is executing this transition. So I said the shift is irreversible, and we open the arms to everyone, and we believe that everyone will get involved.
No, that's good to hear. I think we all realize there are multiple stakeholders in all of our policy networks, in our innovation networks, and making sure that everybody can participate is going to be key in success. We've already seen over the last 16 years, I think it was about 42% reduction in the energy emissions from generation in the last 16 years. But then we have to make it to 40% in 9. So it is going to be a bit of a challenge for us. But we're grateful for the Commission and the leadership that they've led on the generation and ensuring that the new Renewable Energy Directive is in place. How our countries choose to implement it and the speed, that's up to you to be able to push. Okay. Now, if we then consider a little bit the consumer, okay, so we've discussed and you mentioned the price of electricity and the kilowatt energy that we're looking at right now. And that's how most of our citizens experience the policies that we're discussing today, is the price to put on their air conditioner, the price to charge their car. As we're looking at this unprecedented price scaling, the instability, the volatility in the market, these are large structural questions to do with supply and demand, and most citizens don't feel empowered to have any action there. Now, as we're looking at that, the key thing that we need to see is find generation of energy that's stable, but also ensure that the citizen can play a role and does feel empowered in some ways in their daily life. Are there any initiatives or programs that the Commission is supporting or running that does support the citizens and the general public's engagement in this debate? Yeah.
Yes, got it. This is also a very good question. And just to summarize it in one word for everyone here, I think we are talking also about incentives. So indeed, we need to put the proper incentives for everyone to get on board in this transition. And of course, when we talk about making user friendliness and to improve the overall user experience, not just in terms of cost, but also in terms of digital solutions. The Commission is undertaking several actions, particularly if we're talking today about transport, urban mobility, sustainable mobility. Let me, for example, mention in the context of the Fit for 55 package, the Commission has proposed a social climate fund, which is expected to support particularly small and medium enterprises and those parts of the population that are expected to be more prejudiced, more affected for this transformation, to support these businesses, these citizens in this transition, of course, with the required economic support. On the other side, the European Commission is always supporting research and development with, as you all sure know, manifold projects as part of Horizon 2020 and the coming research program where we intend to develop the new digital and the new green solutions that would allow, of course, to create these incentives and improve the overall quality of the products that we are putting in the market. So this is a little bit on a high level perspective, the two main approaches that the Commission is supporting to create these big barriers of incentives. Of course, afterwards, in every specific sectoral legislation, you could find many specific activities to improve the quality of the infrastructure. I could put an example for everyone here today in terms of the alternative fuels infrastructure regulation again. Users have experienced many times and have formulated the problems they have to recharge their vehicle, to find the recharging station, that it's expensive, there are different prices within one another. So the Commission is undertaking in this regard a specific action. We can see that across the different sectoral legislations, so the compromise is strong and we really want to get people on board. As I said, and summarizing again, from a cost approach and also from a quality approach.
Okay, so to recap then, so there's both huge amount of cash, both coming from the European Union's programs. So there's about 2 trillion in the multi-annual plan. And about 30% of that is going to be dedicated to the green transition. And that's a huge amount of cash. But we also, from the other side, are seeing what we would call the engagement approach of cities. We're seeing cities coming up with the net zero targets that they want to move ahead. We have 100 cities that are going to be tried to be identified by the Commission to be leading on this. So there is a sort of a bottom-up approach. Because right now, often we hear these massive numbers and programs, and it's difficult to connect that to the daily life of the citizens. And as you highlighted, the charging of a car, it's so basic. You make an investment and a choice that's good for the environment, and then you don't have the facilities to charge. So there's money going on to the massive investment for infrastructure and grid development, and we can expect to see change quite soon with that money. But you highlighted before that there's also maybe the business models that are weak, and the way that citizens can go from one country to another and be guaranteed of the ability to pay with their normal cards, to not have to register again on a different system. There's a bit of a complexity having so many countries in the EU rolling out so much new technology. Is the Commission looking at some of those business model practices, commercial angles to make it easier?
Yes, I'd like to answer this question putting two examples of Commission support and further policy development to address this question. For example, if we talk about recharging infrastructure for electromobility, in line with what I have expressed before and your question right now in terms of The problem is that all as users we have experience when we try to go with an electric vehicle to recharge the vehicle, and we have not certainty if we can pay with our bank card, maybe with a terminal where we can pay contactless. Other times we need to have a contract. If what occurs if you travel with your vehicle, for example, from Bilbao to Paris, and what happens in Paris, you need another contract to recharge your vehicle. So, to this respect, the Commission is implementing legislation like the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Regulation, where, for example, all recharging points in Europe are expected to have a terminal device by which users can pay in a simple manner using bank cards or their smartphone. There are small but concrete steps that we are taking ahead to support them. Now, on the other side, on the second side, looking at the business models, of course, the Commission cannot intervene or define the business model that is a private approach of every company. However, what we are tending to and what we are fostering is how business models can be more sustainable and can be more profitable. And I'll put you the second example here. When we look, for example, at urban mobility, we can agree that we see in Europe and possibly almost all around the world the development of electric scooters. We all benefit from having scooters in our cities, but we also have noticed, for example, that in some cities, in some towns, there are more than 10, 15, 8 different companies, different business models. So, of course, we all can agree that this is not sustainable, this is not profitable for all of them. So, at EU level approach, we also want to foster, we want to promote strong business models. We also want to promote merger and acquisition, so the developing of a strong market. So, to this respect, of course, if we talk about particularly urban mobility, I think we are also putting in place the relevant incentives and having ongoing discussions with the industry, with specific stakeholders in each domain, in each different dimension, to, 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 to look for clarity on this approach and try to develop a stronger industry with a stronger business model that would reflect better, of course, the demands and the needs from users.
Yep. Okay, that's good to hear. I mean, we've been reflecting today on some of the very issues on micromobility and the electric scooter bike phenomenon, where we do have cases of some cities being swamped with new innovation in the market and the business models not being sustainable, and the citizens come to use this, and then within 2 months, half of the market's gone. We have the case, and I think a case in point, in Oslo, where they've removed 70% of the electric scooters overnight. It was the regulation was light, the experience was new, and they were early adopters. And as you said, that consolidation has to come along. As they burn through their venture capital, someone has to finally make some profit to survive. And we're seeing that some of that experience of the cities that have gone ahead is being useful as other cities are negotiating their concessions for some of these micromobility solutions. And we're seeing that the business model just really isn't stable. We have benefited from logistics solutions. So we're all used to now making an order for groceries to be delivered to our home. And we expect them now to be there in 15 or 20 minutes. And what we're finding is that during COVID times, these companies had incredible volumes of business. But in their headquarters, they had to fire 500 staff because they haven't actually found a business model that works yet. And each delivery was costing them 50 cents. So the volume was burning through their cash. And so we do know that some of the great innovation we're seeing in these gig economy changes really aren't mature. And I think we're going to see the same in some of the charging companies that are setting up and the solutions. And I think we should expect a little bit of volatility, hopefully not on the same level as we saw in the micromobility solutions, given that we have regulation in place. One question for you is, we are going to check in and see if there's any questions coming in on those two topics, which is generation and then the consumer experience.
I have a beyond the hardware and the regulations, we've seen how the COVID pandemic has driven a change in consumer habits. So how can countries leverage the resources and this strategy to change people's habits and reduce, for instance, private car use?
Okay, it's just to make sure you can... COVID led to behavioral changes and decreases in car use. And how can we actually harness those changes? So first of all, a clarification there. The rebound was very swift in personal car use. So it was very much a blip. And while people felt a great deal of uncertainty, they did revert to their own cars. But I must congratulate the UK government. They've managed to remove an enormous number of diesel and petrol cars in an incredibly short time from the streets of the UK by not having a distribution system in place. Whatever the reason, well done to them. Hopefully that'll stay changing there. But from your side, from Brussels, what can we do to try and make those changes that we saw on car use and perceptions of public transport, how can we make that shift a more permanent? Because that's what we're seeing in EIT urban mobility, is making the shift is really a little more complex right now, while people have a level of uncertainty and doubt and concern that goes beyond infection. You know, people now associate public transport in many of their minds with a questionable experience. They're not comfortable in crowds. Europe depends on mass transit. So is the Commission working on any of those support structures, not just direct subsidies to public transport, but to try to drive the perception change and behaviour change?
Yes, absolutely, and indeed, it's not all about subsidies. Indeed, I think it's very, very important, and we are still in a phase, if you allow me, trying to and to understand what are easily the impacts and the changes occur during the period of the confinements, during the whole intense period of the COVID pandemic. And undoubtedly, it has opened a window of opportunity for different transport modes when we talk in transport on how this transformation, this transition should be carried out. So, in first place, now, as part of all the legislative proposals that the Commission is preparing, of course, there are relevant parts in the impact assessments. We are assessing deeply how this impact, what are the benefits that they have reported, and how we can, in terms of concrete measures, concrete provisions that we can include, that we can pinpoint these changes. So this is a first and foremost essential steps, action that we can take from a policy side to support these changes. Concrete examples, for example, we have seen here in Brussels, of course, how has been this change from almost not having cars in the streets, and how the people perception has increased towards cycling, walking, and daily commuting. So, of course, this is an super big window of opportunity that now we have to materialize. And to materialize it, we need to understand what concrete policy measures we can include in legislation and how we should further continue the dialogue with, of course, the different stakeholders, social communities, urban nodes, to pinpoint this opportunity and not lose it.
Okay. So that consultative approach is something that I think we will have more need for over the next few years as we go through the energy change. We've seen some great work being done on energy poverty research, but now we're going to see, as that demand need for electric energy increases, more need to consult with our general public. You know, if we make a change in Spain, for example, I think it's if all the cars that were run right now on carbon energy were to switch to electricity, we would need to have triple our generation. And we just aren't capable of doing that if everybody's to switch to electric tomorrow. So how we would manage that change, the demand, is that going to push up that price? So those that are already dealing with energy poverty in their home for heating or cooling, will they have to pay more so that middle class people can have an electric car? You know, these are some of the trade-offs that we need to start discussing. It's almost as though we've not yet realized the knock-on effects of what we're doing on mobility, given that so much of our energy is coming from that. But that's one of the capillary experiences of our citizens, is with the daily experience of a commute, where they meet people they wouldn't normally ever socialize with. They have that point of contact with micro relations, and we call them micro-social relations on public transport. And so we do know that countries that have repetitive micro-social and positive micro-social interactions, this will be, for example, Sakis, you're on the bus, you're getting on the bus, and you step out the way and you let someone who's got a bag go before you. Now, you might think that is it's nothing, it's a little bit of education, but it's actually a huge social impact. The person who steps out the way shows momentary respect and recognition of someone's right as a human being to behave and to be respected. And that person feels good. And it's called microsocial positive interactions. Now, that not only affects them, but it affects the other people in the queue of the bus and the driver who sees it happens. And in countries where there are multiple positive micro interactions every day, you have higher social stability and people feel more related. And it might be little superficial actions, but those superficial actions change. We benefit from mass transit in Europe is that we have lots of these micro-social interactions. We're not all in cars. And these are some of the things that when we talk about our investments, we're investing in our society. You know, our transit systems and our network allows our society to function, to have social relations, to earn money, to go to your workplaces. And I think that's one of those dynamics. We often get lost in our high-level business interests and inventions and don't realize it's an intrinsic part. It's the fluid of our society, so we're working here. We're checking for questions. We've got one coming in. Yeah. Okay. Technology, 1 second, we're just giving a mic over to get the question from the audience.
There's one more question in regards of it's if this strategy, the European Sustainable Mobility Strategy, could be a blueprint for other regions. And if so, how to navigate important governance and regulatory differences between countries? Okay. In relation to if the model that the European Union has taken would be applicable for other regions of the world, and if so, how is the European Union driving and lobbying to make that model understandable and communicated to other regions and other countries? So are you involved in these international bodies where you explain the European strategy and help them?
Yes, absolutely. Taking on the first question, and this is very important, this strategy indeed is not only for Europe, rather than for everyone. So one of the objectives that the Commission has, and not only on this transport strategy, but if we look at the EU data strategy, artificial intelligence, this transition towards zero emissions, the Commission is trying to lead by example. So we are trying to become ourselves in the generators of a set of principles that we want to extrapolate to the rest of the world. So the challenge is accepted. That's also our objective, and we are also contributing, for example, with me here today, but participating as well in other fora in other regions to support this. In concrete terms, what are we doing in international cooperation? I will put you an example. For example, the Commission has established, is establishing and is defining a cooperation, for example, with America, and concretely the United States, on the definition of high-level standardization areas in the area of transport and other industry approach that will need to be extrapolated, also following the Commission guidelines and policies defined. We are also talking, for example, with LATAM in different areas, for example, on how the approach for the uptake of electromobility could be replicated in other regions of Latin America. We are also, of course, in discussion when we talk with Asia as well on how we can endorse and adopt and formalize and extrapolate as well the principles, for example, on data sharing, when we talk about mass, that the Commission with GDPR and protecting users has established how we can take this to other regions of Europe. So not only to ensure that when our citizens go outside of Europe, feel safe and secure, but also that other regions could take on board our ideas and our principles that we strongly believe that protect our users and ensure the development of a free and competitive market. So, as I said, we have multiple fronts open international cooperation at different levels of the industry approach, not only transport, but also energy, technology. And of course, this is ongoing, and we also believe that with this new commission mandate, that we are, of course, paving the way to grow, escalating importance, and also try to further convey our ideas.
Okay. And on the second element of that, how applicable is the European experience on climate change and energy generation and the green movement? How applicable is it to the countries that are in our neighbourhoods? So North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East. They're very different demographics. They have massive growth rates. Does it really work when we try and give them policies and examples? Have you seen any great successes or notable failures?
The thing here is we are seeing, and at the end, the policies that we are trying to apply to the transformation that we are undertaking are very much related with technology in a very high share. And to this aspect, we cannot expect a radical transformation. Technological policy and social transformation are gradual. And there is a word that indeed it has been mentioned before, that is the capillarity. And the capillarity of that society, by their intrinsic conditions, are more complicated. And of course, it's more difficult for us at some points with the neighboring countries, for example, to some of them, as said, by their intrinsic conditions, to achieve that our values, our principles, our policies, our social perceptions are adopted. However, what we are doing, for example, in specific legislation, and I could mention, for example, sustainable alternative fuels for maritime and aviation. We are trying, of course, that those that come to European field, those companies, those stakeholders that operate in European territory have to follow these European rules and these European principles that inherently are conditioning the way they operate in their original region. So this is also a little bit some strategies that the Commission in the policy developing is trying to implement. And however, as I said, it's very important for us as well to continue the social dialogue with all these regions, and we have to be very realistic. All social transformations are gradual. They don't have a radical implementation. So we have to be resilient and keep working and keep progressing together.
Okay, so it's more a sort of a leakage of our own policy strategy that's impacting others and sort of a nudge to push them towards our area and our modes of seeing the green economy changes than in imposing or demanding. If you want to do business, you play by our rules in our area, and hopefully we will have an impact on how the company perceives the challenges of clean society and change how they behave in other countries. We have to work in the realistic world of constraints of business. So, you know, we can only regulate within our own neighborhood. Yeah. So the last area we wanted to talk about is more to do with data. Twice we've sort of mentioned the idea of the consumer, and then the experience in relation to charging and the ability to go to different countries, use the same payment method, not having to register. And that takes us to the data area of the huge bucket of mass. Mobility as a service, it probably means different things to lots of different people. And for us, that's one of our big key areas is do we keep talking about mass and the interoperability, the one system that's the back end for us to be able to have a billing system, an information system, a planning system that different cities can all cooperate on for mobility. That challenge of mass, what do you see from the side of the Commission is some of those issues of data, ownership of data, like, yeah, we can all share data, but you share your data with me. You know, some of those proprietary attitudes. What do you think that we might need to do in Europe to actually make mass happen in the next 5 years?
So to answer this question, we already start intensively working in 2019 when the Commission carried out a study on the barriers for EU-wide ticketing. So in this concrete area, we try to see how mobility as a service, what are the challenges that was experiencing concretely about ticketing and the overall implementation of MAS, also looking at the business perspective. And in this study, we have identified three main barriers. The first one, in transparent conditions. We have seen that certain stakeholders, certain business model, they do not apply the same transparent conditions that all the other stakeholders, all the other users would like to have in place. So this is important that the market, the mobility as a service as a whole, establish a set of transparent conditions that apply for all, and this is also very much interlinked with the concept of the business model. So we believe here there is big room for improvement to achieve one thing, that is trust, that all the stakeholders with the users trust in this environment. We are still missing this, and we think that this is one of the main barriers. The second barrier, very much into the first, what is this leading to? To anti-competitive behavior. We see that certain companies, certain stakeholders, certain applications could adopt, and at some point have some example, we have heard some example that could be abusing of these conditions. And of course, this is due, as explained before, to two things. We need to increase the transparency and the trust in the system. For that, of course, we will look at specific policy measures that could support that, but overall, it's very important that the market and the different stakeholders involved develop this trust, because at the end, it's not the same the trust that could come from legislation rather than the trust that the ecosystem could develop itself. And the third, and very important, are the incentives. But incentives to promote the more sustainable transport. We need that mass is also endorsing and directed to the way we are paving. So we are developing a transition towards zero emissions. So we want mass on board here, and that helps this target. And we see that certain users, many users, are reluctant to mass from the point of view that it does not support their goals and their social conditions. So we need that mass also and better endorse that and moves in that direction. So in essence, these are the main three topics, the main three barriers that we are seeing right now. And now, moving to the point of data. Why data is important in this ecosystem? Because there is a fine line between data protection and how, for example, the GDPR, in which if you allow me, the Commission, we believe that has done a very good work, and we are also leading other regions by the example of GDPR, by which users need to give consent to certain data that they are giving access to. But however, we also believe that in terms of mass and other business models in the transport sector and in other industries, there are certain types of data that, of course, are needed, and this availability it's at some point indispensable to allow the development of these business models and these mass implementations. So, to this respect, of course, as saying, all can be summarized to one word: trust. We want to encourage the system to develop this trust, involving all the different actors, so mass can be developed and can be supported and can be reinforced. So this is the main mapping we have carried out, and from this moment on, of course, we are developing the required policy elements to further support it.
Okay, we'll watch very closely on the implementation. I think we can all agree the vision of mass is not the problem. It's the operations of mass that's the challenge, okay? To be able to use the same identity to book a e-scooter, or to get a train ticket, or to be able to get on a bus, or to be able to turn around and use an autonomous car. It's wonderful if we could do that in any country we go to and never have to register again or check the conditions of security or and be assured the payment's done on the time. So that vision's there. It's just maybe it takes a little more coordination and maybe one or two leading cities to lead the way and enforce on their concessions to public transport some of these sharing conditions. So if any cities want to have a chat with us about being a pilot for new concession conditions, please come and have a chat. Now, I'm aware of the time and we have another session that's going to be coming into the room. Can I just check if there's any other questions coming? From the room here, is there any questions that I realize there's a little distance, but if anyone's questions? No? So, Saki, any final comments from you that you would want to give a little insight for the people who are watching on screen or here on the directions and the speed that we could expect to see rollouts of charger systems all across our countries? When do you think we're going to see that? When will we see the flow through of the cash from the recovery funds? When will we start to see that infrastructure rolling out next to us? I think the objective is every 60 kilometers that there'll be a charging point.
Yeah, indeed. I try to wrap up from that point of view, also looking to the technological side. So we believe that we are living in very interesting times from our society, and we are in the early stage yet of a big transformation that is showing exponential change. So towards when we will be closer to 2030, we will start with higher intensity to perceive this change that right now cannot be still perceived, and we are still implementing, as you mentioned, the recovery and resilience plans, all the funding associated to the next EU generation. It will take a bit of time, but we are strongly believe that by the end of 2030, this transformation, this perception is going to take an exponential shape, and it will be very much perceived. For that, I mean, an example, we just not have more than to see the projections for EV adoption in the next years. And of course, if we talk about electromobility, when we see the CO2 regulation standards, I said this is an irreversible shift and it will arrive yes or yes. However, having said that, and when we talk about electric mobility, and for example, we see the link to infrastructure, and people also are very much concerned of what is the enough infrastructure, how we solve the chicken egg problem of vehicle recharging. And in this respect, the Commission for Public Recharging Infrastructure is proposing targets, more binding targets for member states, still to be discussed in the Council and the European Parliament. However, at the end, how do we see an electric vehicle? Well, possibly it won't differ much than as a phone, no? How do we use a phone? You charge it at home, at night, and possibly at work when you are at work. But at the end, you don't stop much to recharge in a public space. So in the future, we don't see that the vehicle possibly won't differ much. Of course, we will need public infrastructure, but we would also need to see at the private recharging needs that will have a dominant share for recharging. So what I'm trying to say here and trying to finalize is that we are starting a transformation. There are many different areas we have to cover, and this will not be a radical and a sudden change, but rather than will be an incremental change that it will accelerate a lot in the next years.
Great. I think we're looking forward to that change, and both those who are attending here and those online will have a major role to play in that in Spain and in wider Europe. Thank you very, very much for your time today. We look forward to chatting. I'll be in Brussels the week of the 18th. We'll have a chance to catch up face to face then. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Gareth, and thank you everyone in Spain today. Bye.
Okay. Goodbye. So, thank you for your time in the hall today. We appreciate that you've taken the time to stay to the end, and we will close off. Thanks for your time. Bye.